I've been asked if I would do a video on carving eyes, and so I thought I'd show you how I carve eyes, or at least some of the ways that I carve eyes. There's a ton of ways to do eyes, and I'll show you some examples here with some of the ones that I have. But every carver you talk to seems to have their own way for doing eyes. I want to show you some of the examples I have, some of them I've done, some of them I've seen or had demonstrated to me, and then show you some of the tools that I use for carving eyes. When you look at eyes, let me pull out an example here. This is one of the more useful things that I've used for carving, helping me carve faces. This is a plaster go-by Dave Stetson. You can call him up and order, email him, whatever, find him on Facebook, find him on his website. But anyway, I don't remember the cost of this. It's fairly minimal, but this is a plaster go-by piece that he uses to show people the facial planes. That's what that thing says, facial planes. Useful, very useful, because it shows you what a face plane should look like. One of the problems that most people have when they do eyes is they don't make them round. I don't know how many carvings I've seen. I've done it myself in the past, but I see a lot of carvings where the eyes are flat. And that's okay if that's the look you're looking for. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm simply saying that in real life, eye is not flat. And when you take into consideration that there's an orb inside that socket and then it's covered up with skin, flesh, then you have to mimic that when you go to carving if you want your carving to be somewhat realistic. Not everything's going to be that way, but you can do it that way and make it more realistic. But when you look at these, I'll get it as close as I can. You see the roundness of the eyeball. And if you don't do that in your carving, then it just doesn't look like I'm thinking if it's not going to look the way you want it to look. So remember to round those eyes. Let me show you some examples. Probably one of the best carvers in the country in terms of caricature carving is Marv Kaisersat, and I have some of his resin examples. And it doesn't matter whether he's carving an old woman or whether he's carving, I don't have any guys out here. I have all women. All these are resin examples of Marv Kaisersat's carving. But here's a good example of one. If you look real close, you can see that eye is rounded. And if you don't do that, then the problem is you're ending up with a flat eye, which is okay when you're painting and you can make it look rounded, but the best thing to do is to have it actually rounded. And so when you look at these things, you want to make sure that the eye is really rounded, because that's not going to give you, a flat eye is not going to give you the detail and the look that you're looking for. Pull out a couple of these. I have a whole series of heads like this. I wish I knew who did them. Someone gave them to me, and I have been using them as examples of expressions. But you can see on this one, eyes are not really flat, or not really round. They're fairly flat except for in the corners. And in the corners is where you get some of that depth of the corner chips out. You'll see that in both of the corners of these eyes. There are chips out, and that's what you want to do. Even if you're not going to completely round the eyeball, at least put chips in the corner so that you can see what an eye looks like. Here's another one. Again, this is probably one of the best eyes I've seen, because it's not rounded to the point where the iris is sticking way out beyond the eye. But what you have are, let me get as close as I can. I don't know how close I can get it, still be in focus. What you have is the chips taken out of the corners and then rounded both ways. Because what you have to understand is if the eye is an orb, the eye is a circle in there, then it's got to be rounded this way from left to right, and it has to be rounded from top to bottom. Because basically that's a little ball stuck in a socket. And then the skin folds over it, and you've got upper eyelids, lower eyelids, you've got skin around it, and then you've got to take into construct and do into consideration that you have this bone here. I think I want to call it the occipital bone, and I may not be right. I don't know what that is. I teach earth science, not biology. Anyway, when you look at these eyes, I'll see if I can turn them so you can see them. You see rounded this way and rounded this way. So from side to side and top to bottom. That's your best bet in making eyes. If you don't make them round, then you're just kind of, you're making, I don't know what kind of eyes you're making. But not every eye has to be just staring forward. I see a lot of carvings where it's got no expression. Try to put a little bit of expression in your eyes. Here's one where it's got sadness. Good little carving. I like it. A lot of complex things going on here, but when you look at what's going on with this eye, it's got some good things going on here. I wish I knew who did these. Cleve Taylor gave them to me, and I use them every once in a while for looking. Here's one that says disgust on it. I think it's funny because he's got that ew look to his face. But here's the other thing. When you start scrunching up the face and adding expression, look what happens to that nose. There's wrinkles on the nose. Most people don't take into account that there's wrinkles on the nose, but when you scrunch up your face and you do something strange to it that you're not normally doing, you get a lot of folds up here and folds out here because the face is full of a bunch of skin. And you've got to take into consideration what happens to that skin when you make a different face than just staring straight forward like you're posing for a photograph. So here, again, you got the rounded top and bottom side to side, and then you take into consideration what happens with the rest of the facial features. And so joy, happiness, disgust, sadness, whatever these are, you've got to understand what happens with the eyes. And I've got a whole bunch of them out here. I'll just line them up and you can see them. Here's fear. Again, look how these eyes are. But here's the problem with this eye right here. It's really deep in these corners. Too deep in my opinion. Because here it's almost a zombie look. And I'm not criticizing the carver. That's not my job here. But I'm simply saying when you make them real deep in the corners, now your best off is to flatten that stuff in between the chips. And if you don't, then you end up with a face that is really, really abnormal. And when you're caricature carving, that's okay to have an abnormal face. Here's one by Gene Fuller. A little smaller version. Might not be able to get the detail in it, but it's rounded this way and it's rounded this way. And then it has the Ronald Reagan smile that you can see there. It's got a really good expression to the face. And everything fits in there, fits really well. Here's another face. It's part of a carving that's in pieces. I was given that carving. I'm trying to repair it. I don't know that I'll ever get around to it. But the eyes have some flat facets like we talk about in flat plane carving, but the corners still are cut in. The corners still have the depth to them. So that makes that eye look rounded from left to right, and the way the chip is taken off underneath the eyelid here and the eyelid here, it makes it look like it's rounded here. And in that expression, look how you've got a lot of wrinkles over here because the face is looking to this side, and you've got a lot of wrinkles here, not as many here because this eye is more scrunched up. Again, I would challenge you as a carver to be a little more creative in how you do faces. Here's a simple one by Rich Weatherby, real simple carving. Doesn't have a lot of eye in there. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it doesn't have a lot of eye in there. But it does on this one. So you can make two eyes look differently. No, both eyes don't have to look the same. Don't think that they do unless that's the look you're looking for. Because quite often, if you look at people, no two eyes are exactly the same. Okay, I don't want to, let me back that up. A lot of times the eyes are the same, but quite often they are not either. And so you can get eyes of any size, shape, configuration that you'll see. Here's a example by Chris Hammock. And so this is a little bit different than the normal eye he does. I'll show you one of those in a minute. But the eyes are rounded here, and the expression is all fitting in. Now here these two eyes look almost exactly the same. So it goes against what I said a minute ago, but most of the time these eyes don't always have to look the same. Don't think that your eyes have to be a mirror of each other, because quite often in your look, when you're looking at something, you've got different looks to your face. Here's another one. This one's by Rich Weatherby. I'm sorry, that other one was by Chris Hammock. Here's a rich Weatherby, and he's got his eyes almost closed, almost like a look of bliss to his face. If you'll see that, you'll see the carving is just the rounded part is there, but there's a slit there, almost like his eyes are half closed. You know, it looks like a cowboy after he had a good biscuits and gravy breakfast. But he's got that look to him. Everything fits together. That's the biggest thing to remember about the face, is making everything fit together. Here's one of a knight. And so the eyes are rounded. I think this was done by Cleve Taylor. The eyes are rounded left to right and top to bottom, and the rest of the face fits together. Here's another cowboy. Again, you've got eyes. You've got a rounded place for the eyeball to go. Don't make that eye socket so deep in there that you don't have room for it to put the eye in. And then there's just tiny little slits. This is obviously done with a very sharp pointed knife. Trying to get the light and the focus in there, right? You can see that it's rounded in there, even though almost everything is an angular cut. And so you've got a lot of different ways to do that. Let me show you one that I took a class with Chris Hammock back in 2012. And this is one that he said, you know, we were talking about how many steps it takes to carve eyes. And he said, I bet I can do it in 5 steps. And sure enough, he grabbed a little 1.5 or whatever this is piece of wood. There's 1 step. Cut out the eyelid. Cut out the eyeball. Cut out the bag. And add the details. And so this is something real simple. If you start with the plane, and then you go to cutting out the the eyelid up above the eye, where the eye's going to go. Then in the eye mound you've got right here, you've got a few cuts that makes the eye round. His is pretty deep in here because he's looking for that hangdog, haggard, worn out cowboy look, and that works for the carvings he's doing. Here you've got the bag that's cut in, and then after that you've got the eyebrows. And he does eyebrows a little differently than most other people do. Most other people, from the bridge of the nose, eyebrow goes this way, but his are backwards. And he likes it that way, and he makes it work, and it's really good. I tried to repeat that. I'm not sure I got very good. This was in the same weekend. I did my cutout, and then the eyelid there, then the eyeball, and then the bag, and then some more details. And I'm pretty sure I didn't get there, but if you start with a nose on your eyeball and you have something to work with, then it's easy. So for those of you that are not used to looking at eyes, I want to show you a book that I've used extensively. I use this book a lot. It's a book by Mark Simon. And it's called Facial Expressions, a Visual Reference for Artists. And when you flip open here, I'll show you just a couple pages. When you flip open here, if you'll look at this guy's face here, and then look here, they're 2 different faces. He's got a smile, he's got a straightforward look. If you were to cover up the bottom part of those faces, you can't really tell what's happening above the nose. And so it's hard to tell whether he is smiling, grimacing, or whatever, because the eyes are not the only part of the expression. When you're doing eyes and when you're doing faces, you've got to have everything tie in together, because I don't know how many muscles there are on your face. Got to be a lot of them. But when you move that up, and now we're going to cover up from the eyes up, now look at that difference on those 2 faces. Now you can definitely see that's a straightforward look. This is a smiley look. So if you don't include those 2 pieces, if you do not include the expression part that goes with the eye, then you're not really getting the full effect of carving. Anyway, this book is really useful. Let me see if I can pan out a little bit. This book is really useful for faces, for women, men, people wearing glasses, some with lots of hair, women with long hair, men with short hair. It's not a very expensive book, but it is a very, very useful book for looking. There's even one for babies to teenagers. I picked that one up too. I don't use it quite as much. I don't do as many kids and I don't do as many babies. But this is, it's got some different things going on in here in terms of what it looks like when you put in a whole face, even with their hands to their face, bald-headed people, wearing a hat, elderly lady with different expressions. And so you can get a lot of different, there's one, I forgot the kissing gallery was in there. Apologize for those of you that are sensitive to that. But anyway, this also tells you what the phoneme looks like. So if a mouth is making a sound, A, B, C, D, or E, that's what that's going to look like. So for those of you that want to really take your carving up to another level, here's one on headgear, pictures of headgear. You don't have to go out and buy a bunch of hats. I've done that in the past, and I know I'm not going to buy any more hats in the future. And so this is a useful book. Again, it's called Facial Expressions by Mark Simon, a visual reference for artists, and it really comes in handy when you're looking at carving faces. So on the next video, I'll show you where we'll get started. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these face sticks here, and we'll see where we go from there. I'll see you in the next round.